Look at a map of the United States. You'll see a variety of state borders. Many are straight vertical and horizontal lines, especially in the western states, which follow the lines of latitude and longitude, while other states' borders are squiggly, due to them being created by distinctive topography such as rivers, mountains, and deserts. But then there are some appendages that stick out from the side of states. They're known as panhandles, because they tend to look like, well, the handle on a pan. A panhandle is a unique geographic extension of a state that stretches out into another territory. The total in the US is 10 panhandles, and these extensions can be found in several states, each with its unique history and characteristics. So which are the official panhandle states of the US? There are 10 of them total in 9 different states, with one state having 2. Texas, with its northern panhandle, Florida with its northern part that isn't the peninsula, Nebraska in its western part, Idaho in the northern part of the state, Alaska with its narrow coastline within Canada, Connecticut, which has a panhandle by definition but is so small it doesn't look like one, West Virginia with its narrow strip of land sandwiched between Ohio and Pennsylvania, and its eastern panhandle towards Maryland and Washington, D.C. Maryland in the west, and perhaps the most iconic of all, Oklahoma, with its tiny horizontal strip of land above Texas. Now that we've learned which U.S. states have panhandles and what they look like, let's learn why they exist. Starting with the Lone Star State, Texas is the second largest state that has a notable panhandle. The Panhandle is the largest of the 9 panhandles in the continental United States and spans 160 miles east to west and north to south, covering 25,820 square miles, which is 10% of Texas's total area. The Panhandle shape was finalized by the Compromise of 1850, following the Mexican-American War in 1848. This compromise set Texas's northern boundaries to prevent the spread of slavery, creating the distinctive rectangle. Texas also received $10 million for the land it ceded up north, leaving a small gap between them and Kansas. This small strip of land eventually became part of Oklahoma's panhandle, which we'll cover later in the video. Now moving east, we visit the most populous and probably the best known of the nation's panhandles, the Florida Panhandle. Initially, the whole panhandle was considerably larger, reaching all the way to the Mississippi River during the peak of Spanish rule. The French controlled the nearby Louisiana Territory, and after the French and Indian War, England took over this region, known as the Mississippi Territory. England also split Florida into 2 parts, West and East Florida. After the Revolutionary War, the U.S. split the Mississippi Territory into 2 different states, but the Panhandle continued to exist. With the Louisiana Purchase, the longer Panhandle was annexed by the U.S., removing it from Spanish territory. Later, Spain ceded Florida to the United States in 1821 under the Adam-Onis Treaty. The Panhandle, known as West Florida, became part of Florida upon statehood. Alabama's officials felt cheated out of the land and petitioned for the Panhandle multiple times, but were unsuccessful. Today, it is home to over 1.4 million people in 16 counties, making it the most populated out of the nation's 10 panhandles. Tallahassee, the state capital, is the largest city within the Panhandle, with nearly 200,000 residents, followed by Pensacola with 53,000. The Panhandle area also hosts 6 military facilities and 3 seaports. Now let's turn our attention to Nebraska and its distinctive Panhandle. But before that, do subscribe and stay tuned for the 5th Panhandle, as it'll blow your mind due to its fascinating history. So back to looking at the state of Nebraska. You'll notice a rectangle extending westward, bordered by South Dakota, Wyoming, and Colorado. This is the Nebraska Panhandle, a distinctive feature of the state's geography, covering 14,181 square miles, which accounts for about 18% of the state's total area. The origins of this panhandle are unclear. Some believed it's what remained after Colorado, South Dakota, and Wyoming set their borders. Others link it to the Homestead Act of 1862, the railroads, or the Oregon Trail. Regardless of its origin, the Nebraska Panhandle's residents often feel more connected to the West than the Midwest. Efforts have been made to promote its Old West heritage to boost tourism. Ironically, locals from the city of Lincoln proclaim the West begins here, though folks in Scottsbluff and Chadron might disagree, placing it 300 miles further west. Next, we travel 900 miles northwest to a more famous panhandle with an even more rugged western atmosphere, the Idaho Panhandle. It is larger than many realize, starting further south than expected. It's 45 miles wide at the Canadian border, nearly 200 miles across at its base, and stretches 150 miles from north to south. Formed from the Washington Territory in 1863, the Panhandle includes 10 counties. Political maneuvering led to the creation of Idaho's Panhandle, when western Washington and Montana set their preferred boundaries, leaving a finger of land between them. Although they could have split it between them, their desired eastern and western borders respectively didn't align. Today, the Panhandle observes Pacific time, unlike the rest of the state, and residents in northern towns like Coeur d'Alene often feel more connected to Spokane, Washington than to the rest of Idaho. Now we travel to perhaps the most iconic panhandle of all, Oklahoma, with its tiny horizontal strip of land above Texas. The Oklahoma Panhandle had its beginning with the Missouri Compromise, an 1820 law that admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state. The compromise prohibited slavery in the remaining Louisiana Purchase lands north of the 36-degree latitude line. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 further muddied the waters, outlining the guidelines for Kansas and Nebraska to eventually become states. This act left a 34-mile-wide strip of land between Kansas and Texas, creating what would come to be known as no man's land. For the next 40 years, this narrow strip of lawlessness became a haven for outlaws, where violence and mob justice were the only forms of law. Saloons and brothels thrived in this chaotic environment, and one boomtown was straightforwardly named Beer City. This strip was finally assigned to the Oklahoma Territory in 1890 and stayed as a part of Oklahoma when it became a state in 1907. As we leave the continental U.S., our journey now takes us to the vast and rugged expanse of Alaska, home to one of the most unique panhandles in the United States. The Panhandle of Alaska, commonly known as the Southeast, is a stunning region made up of the Alexander Archipelago and a strip of mainland bordering Canada's British Columbia and Yukon territories. Here, you'll find the Tongass National Forest, the largest U.S. national forest, which contains a significant portion of the world's temperate rainforest. In addition, the region is the center of Alaska's timber industry and a major fishing area. Alaska's Panhandle has its origins in colonial disputes between Russia and Great Britain. Alaska was initially a Russian colony, and this strip of land was first populated by Russian explorers and whalers, with British and American settlers arriving later. In 1825, the Russian and British governments signed a treaty that set the southern border approximately where it is today. However, it did not establish a firm eastern boundary, leading to potential territorial disputes. When the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia, it included the Panhandle. Later disputes and surveys took place, and eventually, the boundaries were settled. In summary, the Panhandle exists because the Russians established control before the British could set a firm border during colonial times. We will now hop on a ship and travel through the Panama Canal and all the way to the Atlantic coast, where we find the smallest and oldest of the nation's panhandles. Moreover, we're taking this long route as we might not be able to traverse the canal again due to severe droughts in the region. We also made a video about it, so do check it out. Now, back to the nation's oldest panhandle. The Connecticut Panhandle is pretty much non-existent, but it is officially one, and spans just 48 square miles in the state's southwestern corner. The Panhandle's origins date back to 1650, when Dutch and English colonial leaders set the western boundary of the Connecticut colony. This line extended from Greenwich Bay, under the agreement that it wouldn't come within 10 miles of the Houston River. A 1662 charter firmly set Connecticut's borders, but a 1664 patent granted the Duke of York possession of land from the Connecticut River to Delaware Bay. This led to disputes over the area for 2 decades. At one point, the governor of New York issued arrest warrants for the border town residents who pledged allegiance to Connecticut, while New Yorkers set up a settlement in Tarrytown claimed by Connecticut. It's crazy to think that this type of dispute between parts of the same country existed. But in 1683, New York and Connecticut finally settled, with Connecticut receiving the 61,000-acre rectangle known as the Panhandle. This land provided Connecticut with better access to New York harbors. In addition, New York received the town of Rye and a 1.8-mile-wide strip along Connecticut's western border, known as the Oblong, which the locals often refer it as the Connecticut Tail. Moving southwest from Connecticut, our journey leads us to the Panhandle of West Virginia, a region distinguished by its dual panhandles and scenic landscapes. First, the eastern one. Its belonging to the state is connected with the secession from Virginia altogether. They claimed it at the time because it was a site of a strategic armory important for the internal conflict the country was fighting. West Virginia sided with the Union, which won the war, so they got to keep it. West Virginia's northern panhandle was created while Virginia was still united with it. It was annexed to the state after the Revolutionary War, when Virginia's northern boundary was set along the Ohio River as an agreement to settle colonial disputes between them and Pennsylvania. The Panhandle became an industrial center of iron and steel in the late 1800s due to its prime location along the Ohio River. And finally, Maryland, whose panhandle is thinly connected by just a 1-mile-wide strip of land. This Maryland's Waste connects Maryland to its panhandle, which stretches 80 miles and dips 50 miles south, bordered by the Potomac River and the Mason-Dixon line. It dates back to 1781, when Maryland lobbied the Continental Congress to retain some of its western lands to secure access to farmland and the Mississippi River system, delaying the state's approval of the Articles of Confederation until it got its way. Pennsylvania had to let go of its claim on it for this to happen. The Panhandle is a mountainous and agricultural region, home to Maryland's only ski resort and a part of the Appalachian Range. Its rugged landscape and rich history provides a stark contrast to the bustling urban centers of the state, offering a serene and picturesque escape. So, there you have it, the 10 unique Panhandle states. Do let us know if you belong to any of these Panhandle states in the comments below. Thanks for watching.